I was 7 when I moved into that house at Ashbrook Lane. At least that's what my parents tell me. My recollection of that time is vague. I have memories of the big tree on our lawn, running round and round the garden with the boy next door, and I remember sitting on the living room floor playing with my He-Man figures. But my most vivid memories are of the reoccurring nightmares. To the best of my knowledge, they happened every night I stayed in that house. The first time I woke during the early hours with a feeling that somebody was in the room with me, lurking amidst the darkness, watching me. I lay there rigid and screwed up my eyes tightly, hoping it would pass me by. I felt the bed shake and I stiffened up like a statue, afraid to make even the slightest movement. I heard this raspy breathing from the foot of my bed. It moved round the side of me, then stopped. Moments passed silently. Then I felt his breath on my face. Instinctively, I opened my eyes and saw an emaciated man in a lab coat looming over me, an expression of horror etched into his pale, gaunt face, veins bulging from his forehead. I tried to scream, but he grasped me by the throat with his skeletal fingers and dragged me out of bed. Flailing and contorting, I tried to grab on to something to stop him from taking me. He dragged me out of my room and onto the landing, where I gripped onto the stair rail. He pulled at my arms and then at my feet, and I kicked and screamed in a furious fright for my freedom. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was waking up in my parents' bed. They'd found me sleepwalking across the landing in the middle of the night. I had a lot of nightmares as a kid, which they put down to my active imagination, but sleepwalking, that was a first. I saw that gaunt prowler again the following night. Again, he clasped his hand around my throat before yanking me from my bed. He managed to pull me down the stairs before I kicked myself free of his grip. I heard a chime coming from the grandfather clock in the hallway and found myself waking up in my parents' bed. My dad had woken up in the night and found me laying at the foot of the stairs. Another sleepwalking incident, I guess. I worked myself into such a panic over these dreams that my parents allowed me to stay up late with them one night. We watched TV as I fought to stay awake, terrified of the dreams that awaited me. I didn't remember going to bed that night. I just found myself sitting on the floor, waiting for the time to arrive. The grandfather clock stood in the hallway, ticking away the minutes. Suddenly, a part of the wall opened up to reveal a concealed doorway from which he emerged. He was wearing the same lab coat I'd seen him wear before, only this time it was smeared with blood. Whatever he'd been doing inside that room, I didn't want to find out. I watched with dread as he slowly and methodically slipped a pair of rubber surgical gloves onto his hands. He tinted his fingers together, then turned and looked directly at me with this intense, deep-set stare. A pained grimace stretched across his chalky face. I rushed upstairs, calling out for help, as he crawled behind me, swiping at my heels. I ran into my parents' bedroom. They were asleep and unaware of the commotion. Before I could reach their bed and shake them awake, my pursuer snatched me up with his bony arms and started pulling me away. I managed to grab onto the door frame, and despite his efforts, he could not pry me from it. He relented for a moment, his breath heavy and labored against my neck. Slowly he reached into his pocket and withdrew a scalpel before slicing deeply into my hand. I released my grip on the door frame as blood dripped between my fingers. I shrieked out, but there was no sound. I could see Mom and Dad lying there fast asleep, oblivious to this withered specter hauling me out of their room and all the way to the bottom of the stairs. I tried to claw my way back, leaving streaks of blood over the carpet and walls in my wake. He pressed his fingers against my throat. I whimpered and choked, and my limbs thrashed around in frenzy. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime, and he suddenly abandoned his fight. I looked up to see the emaciated figure creeping back through the secret doorway from which it had emerged. The door sealed shut, disappearing into the wall as though it never existed. A point came where I started to confuse my dreams with reality. I couldn't tell if this was all in my mind or actually happening to me in the middle of the night. During the daylight hours, I examined the wall in the hallway, looking to see if there was some indication of a secret door. I told my parents and my Nan about the dreams, and though I never doubted their concern, there was not a lot they could do except reassure me. I stayed with my parents when I got particularly distressed, either in their bed or we'd bring the blankets and pillow downstairs and have a sleepover in the living room. Nothing helped. My tormentor found me night after night, waiting until my mom and dad were asleep before hauling me away towards that concealed door. I tried to call out, but my screams were always silenced as he gripped his hands around my throat. He grew increasingly violent. Sometimes he would use his scalpel across my hands or under my fingernails. Other times he would inject me with a syringe, and it wasn't unusual for him to bite my fingers. As I prepared for the dreams, I rehearsed how I would try to fight him off, what I could grab onto as he dragged me downstairs. I knew if I could just hold out until the clock chimed, then I would survive another night, because that's when his door sealed shut. What terrified me most was the realization that if he got me into that secret room before the chime of the clock, the door would seal behind us, and nobody would ever see or hear from me again. I don't remember much else about that house, but we didn't stay long. We moved in with my Nan for a while, and even though there wasn't much room for all of us, at least those nightmares stopped. So did the sleepwalking. Of course, I never forgot about those dreams. How could I? But I figured I was just a kid with an overactive imagination, and I never considered them particularly abnormal. That is, until my teens, when I started suspecting something more sinister was at play. I was looking through old photo albums with my parents when we came across some of our old house at Ashbrook Lane. Something wasn't right about that house, I heard my mom say to my dad. This roused my curiosity. What do you mean, Mom? Well, I used to have bad feelings and nightmares when we were living there, she added. Dad tried to change the subject, but I persisted. What sort of nightmares? I inquired. I don't want to go into it, just violent and disturbing dreams. I had reoccurring nightmares in that house too, I said. You were too young to remember your dreams, my dad interrupted. You probably just picked up on something you heard us talking about. I felt insulted, like they were dismissing me, but you don't forget dreams like those. I tried pushing for more information, but they weren't forthcoming. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that we were able to talk about it again. I was in the living room with my parents, and my dad was reading the paper. He casually told my mom, Our old house in Ashbrook Lane is up for sale again. I'm not surprised. Nobody stays there long, she replied. It makes you wonder. My dad nodded in agreement. So what exactly happened in that house? I interjected. Maybe it was because so much time had passed, or perhaps it's because I was older, but they were more open with me this time. My mom explained how she'd had visions of dead bodies lying on the floor, blood all over the walls, and she claimed she'd felt a presence. While alone, she would often hear crying from inside the house. She also revealed that my aunt and uncle had come to stay one weekend and woke up in the middle of the night to see a figure of a tall man wandering through the house. My aunt and uncle had passed away by this time, so I was unable to ask them about the experience. But Mom explained that they were so distressed by the incident that they returned home the next day. I asked Dad, Did you have anything happen to you? My dad had always been a very grounded skeptic, but I knew something had affected him too, though he wouldn't admit it. There was just an uncomfortable feeling, he said, and volunteered nothing more. Ever since learning of my mom, aunt, and uncle's experience in that house, I've been overwhelmed with curiosity. Like my dad, I'm quite the skeptic, and I was convinced there was a rational explanation for all this. Even so, I wanted to know more about that house. From time to time, I would check the newspapers, and just as my parents had said, the house was rarely occupied for more than 6 months before going up for sale. There wasn't much more I could find out at this time. I'm sure the information and the history is available in some archive somewhere, but I wouldn't know where to start. However, I was passing by that area one day and got the idea to drive by the house. It was unoccupied. I noted down the phone number on the for sale sign, and later that day, I called the estate agent and requested a viewing. The lady who met me for the viewing introduced herself as Andrea. We went inside, and immediately I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was probably my mind running away from me, but I got this eerie feeling. I can only describe it as being like the tension that lingers in the air after a big argument. If I'm honest, I barely recognized the interior of the house. My memory was vague, but there was one area that brought to mind those reoccurring nightmares, and that was the hallway. I continued the tour as Andrea gave me her sales pitch. As we walked around, I was convinced that the wall in the hallway was hiding something. "What's behind this wall?" I asked. The look on her face at that moment could disguise none of the lies she proceeded to tell me. It wasn't my intention to make her uncomfortable, but I really wanted some answers. She started mumbling awkwardly about an old boiler room that had been bricked over. She stopped mid-sentence. "You know something about this house, don't you?" she asked, in a tone of surrender. "I used to live here as a kid," I explained. "Something isn't right about this house, is it?" Although still apprehensive, it was as if I had freed her from an eternal silence. It could cost me my job if I told you." "Can't be much worse than what I already suspect," I said. "Was somebody murdered here, behind this wall?" I'd put her on edge. She took a cautious glance over her shoulder. "Do you mind if we talk about this somewhere else? I'm really not comfortable talking about it here." We decided to go for coffee, and that is where I learned. In 1953, Dr. Henry Fenton moved into Ashbrook Lane with his wife, Mary, and their teenage son, Raymond. The upper floor would serve as their living quarters, and he had the lower part of the house to convert into his doctor practice. His office was just off the hallway, opposite which stood his prized grandfather clock. Things were going well for the Fentons, and business was thriving. Then, one day, Mary fell down the stairs in their home and broke her neck. She died instantly. Henry reacted to the tragedy by immersing himself in his work, using his practice as a distraction from his heartache. Raymond, on the other hand, was struggling to come to terms with his mother's death. With his father too busy to offer the emotional support he needed, he started to drift. He fell in with a bad crowd, started skipping school, experimenting with drugs, and there were a couple of times he'd been caught drinking or brawling and was escorted home by the police. Henry barely noticed or cared about his son's trouble during this time. Once he closed his practice for the day, he would collapse into his armchair and attempt to repress his grief with liquor. Some nights he'd drink himself into a coma. Other nights he'd fly into a rage, smashing furniture and throwing things around the room. Sometimes it was his son who bore the brunt of this temper. Raymond was taken in by his grandparents soon after, leaving Henry Fenton all alone in that house on Ashbrook Lane. Later that year, on a cold autumn night, Henry was woken by a disturbance downstairs. Emboldened by the liquor, he decided to go and confront the intruder. His practice was the only thing he had going for him, and he refused to let some thugs take it away. Henry tiptoed into the darkness. He saw the light of a torch from the far room and heard the intruders rummaging through the cupboards and shelves. It was probably some junkies, after the drugs and syringes he kept on the premise. Henry snuck into his office, withdrew a scalpel from the drawer, tucked himself into a dark corner, and waited. The intruder entered the room, a rucksack over his shoulder, and his face covered by a black mask. Henry sprung out of the darkness and brandished the scalpel, ordering him to drop the bag. The masked man panicked and lunged towards him, attempting to push past him and make his escape. Henry swiped out blindly as he fell backwards against the wall. The intruder staggered along the hallway and opened the front door before collapsing on the doorstep. Henry got to his feet and approached the fallen man. Blood gushed from a deep incision across his throat, from where the scalpel had made contact. Henry pushed the mask from the man's face to clear his airway. Staring back at him in the moonlight, eyes wide with terror, Henry saw the face of his son, Raymond. His heart wrenched at the sight before him. What had he done? How could he have known? His professional instinct kicked in, and he sprung into action. Raymond thrashed about, choking and gurgling on his own blood, as his father gripped his throat, pressing his bony fingers firmly against the wound in an attempt to contain the bleeding. He proceeded to drag him to his office, where he would clamp and stitch the laceration. But by the time he got there, it was too late. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime. Patients turned up to the practice the following day to find Raymond cradled in Dr. Fenton's arms. Unable to come to terms with killing his own son, Henry had turned the scalpel upon himself, slashing his own wrists before bleeding to death on the floor of his office.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel, so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do, and it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.